I'm going to go ahead and jump into Art. Pronouns he, him from Pennsylvania says, atheists are quitters. You're absolutely right. Sometimes. Art, you're on AXP. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How you guys doing?
I'm doing well, man. Never had a bad day in my life.
Okay.
So what do you mean atheists are quitters? I can't tell if you're joking or not.
No, I'm not joking. Let me begin with the fact. Humans have invented thousands of gods, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, from that, I could draw two conclusions, not a proof, but two conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
One is that since we assume all those gods like Thor and whatever are fictional, it would be easy to suspect that gods of today are fictional. Jesus, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
I can vibe with that.
Because it's been so pervasive, we might think that maybe there's something there to be discovered. And I'm going to turn to something I read about chemistry very briefly. The alchemists believed in the four elements, and they were trying to make lead into gold. They failed. But I read that they precipitated or helped the development of chemistry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big part of the history of science, yeah.
Etc. So the idea is, I think that perhaps there's something out there to be discovered. And so it's kind of like you have the Hegel, you have the thesis of theism, you have the antithesis of atheism. And I'd say that perhaps there's a synthesis, but atheists don't go there. In other words, they stop at the antithesis.
Right, right.
And can I just say one more thing before I stop? Atheism is good. It's disconfirming evidence. And if you want to find the truth, you should not only look for evidence which supports what you believe, but evidence which contradicts what you believe. So I've gained a lot from listening to atheists and reading atheist material. It's good stuff. But I feel that there's another step to go and they don't take it. And that's my whole case.
What's the step? What is the step?
The stop is that they go from, some do, they go from a rather naive, silly idea of God. Let's say like Thor and Jesus, like God impregnated a woman that wasn't his wife so their baby could grow up to be tortured. They go from that idea to there is no God. Well, I think that somewhere in between is maybe some sort of ultimate reality or something that
you understand just how silly the whole Jesus story is, right? I mean, because it is literally what you just said, right? You've got an omni-God who effectively built the world so he could kill his son.
Yeah, I agree. Perfect.
Right, and that is not a God that's worthy of worship. That is not and there's no evidence for it, right? Because it's not rational to accept things as true when you don't have sufficient good evidence to do so. And so, yeah, I mean, throwing out things because they're ridiculous and is perfectly valid.
Yeah, I would build off of what Jim was saying because, like, you're absolutely right. The premise as a whole is fatuous and it doesn't really work. But even if I wanted to give it a lot more, leeway and kind of go into speak to your point a little bit about like, well, okay, yeah, we can reject Christianity and we can reject these big God claims, but that's not to say that there isn't some sort of supernatural thing that's guiding planetary formation and guiding evolution and it's kind of participating in this way. And for that, I would just say, okay, show me evidence. Like that's the thing. It may be that there is something out there that's a little bit beyond our understanding. But until we have good reason to believe that, it would be silly for us to then say, well, just based on the possibility, I guess I better assume. It reminds me, there's an old story that is probably apocryphal, but it's pervasive, of Napoleon meeting with Pierre-Simon Laplace, the great French physicist. And Laplace has done all this research and published all this work in mathematics and astronomy and in physics and all sorts of amazing things, discovering how the universe works. And Napoleon says, I praise you for all this work of discovering, all the inner mechanisms of the universe around us, but I notice you've never talked about the universe's designer. And Laplace says, I had no need for that hypothesis. It works just fine without it. And so from an atheist perspective, I'm a scientist. I study science and teach it for a living. As I do that, I could say, okay, so here's everything I know about evolution, and here's everything I know about life, and here's everything. And also, there's this magic too. But why? Why would I need to do that? What am I missing out on by not doing that until proven that I should,
Right.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm sorry.
You're just fine. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I would say that supernatural is a vacuous term because we don't know the limits of the natural world. So what I'm talking about is finding, as I say, I haven't found it, but something like some sort of supreme being, not in the sense of a person, maybe, but in the sense of like ultimate ground of existence, something like what the Taoists talk about. Or what I'm saying is that we're not, and also, let me get back to an original point, because so many cultures have created so many gods and goddesses, I think it's easy to think that maybe it's something there, but they're just not getting there.
Lots of cultures have dragons too.
Right.
Is there something there?
I'm sorry, what was that? I missed that.
Lots of cultures have traditions of dragons as well. Cultures all over the world have stories about dragons. Do we need to be thinking about dragons as maybe a possibility as well?
Or is it much more reasonable to conclude that all dragon stories start with a
dinosaur fossil or something?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the storytelling you're talking about, right? We like to have explanations for things. And so, something that we can't explain, God is a perfectly good explanation until you have better explanations. And now we're at a point where we can look at the entire world and go, it's just not necessary.
Yeah, that really is what it boils down to, for me at least, is I think you hit the nail on the head when you started this call by talking about alchemy. They didn't know what an atom was. They didn't know what the 118 elements that we know about today were. There's a reason why we still talk about oxygenation whenever something is losing electrons. We call it oxidation, because even though it's losing something, it's getting lighter. And so we used to think, it's turning into oxygen. We have these fossils, these vestiges, these artifacts of early science because we didn't know any better at the time. And now we do. And so with religion, you're right. Lots of cultures, pretty much every culture all over the world has some sort of supernatural, some sort of religious backing to what they think happened in the world. They have some religious explanation for the world around them. But because it's their first attempt at explaining the natural world, it's also their worst attempt. We didn't know where lightning came from. I know everything that happens is caused by me. So if I'm not doing the lightning, somebody else is. I'm going to name him Thor. You know what I mean? But now we understand how electrons work. We understand a little bit more about weather. We don't need that anymore. The same way that we don't need, alchemy to try to turn lead into gold. We know how gold is produced. We know we can make it through nuclear fusion if we really wanted to. We know so much more, and it's so much cooler without that supernatural stuff involved.
And also just Occam's razor, right? It's the explanation that has the fewest assumptions that covers everything that is best. And as atheists, we have one less assumption than you do, right? We have one less premise than you do. Right, you've added God for no particular reason that we can determine, and so why do we need God for anything?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say you need it. All I'm saying is, let's put it this way. I'm saying maybe the alchemists are like the religious people, and they were all wrong, and they were doomed to failure. And I'm saying, by this analogy, maybe the atheists are like the guys who said to the alchemists, forget about it. Give it up. Just forget about it. But because the alchemists persisted, they eventually chemistry.
Right, but those alchemists persisted to do tests and to attempt to prove that you could do it.
Yeah.
Right, and had the chemistry not evolved from that, they'd have been a dead end. Like so many, like phrenology and so many other so-called sciences that have, hit the stage, so to speak. And so again, the time to believe something is when you have sufficient good evidence. We don't have sufficient good evidence to believe. Occam's razor tells us that if we don't need that particular premise, then we shouldn't use it. And furthermore, believing in God, which version do you want to pick from? Because there's at least 1,000 different denominations with 1,000 different gods. Some of those people say that gay people should burn, and some say they shouldn't. And then you've got the quote that Forrest read earlier. about not allowing a woman to teach a man. I mean, we've had some phenomenal women, some of whom were responsible for expanding the Christian faith, who did some amazing things with teaching and with science. And yet, if that had been followed exactly, then guess what? None of those things would have happened. And so limiting one gender of the human race just seems incredibly stupid, given that both genders are equally intelligent, equally smart, and equally driven, and can do many of the same things. It just seems stupid. And if you have to pick a religion, now you have to go in, especially with Christianity, now you have to go in and interpret a book. A book that was not designed to be a science book, was not written to be interpreted in only one way. It's just a series of stories that you get to interpret any which way you want, and they're all valid. The guys at the Baptist, Westboro Baptist Church, are just as valid as the most liberal church here in Austin. They both have very, very valid beliefs. They're both based on the Bible, and they're both equally correct in their interpretation of the Bible, because that's all it is interpretation. So why limit yourself in terms of that when you can look at everything that can be done and look at, and why restrict anything? Why be bigoted? Why be misogynistic about it?
Yeah, I think that really does speak to the fact that, like, because I understand what you're saying. You're not saying like necessarily specifically only the Bible type. But like that is the gambit, isn't it? Yeah. Though, is that like you have to pick?
No. Can I elaborate on that? I think
sure.
that what I'm envisioning doesn't exist, or at least, but the epistemological method would have, if you're going to do a genuine search, you have to give up the silly epistemological method where someone said something or wrote it down, therefore it's true.
Right.
Yeah.
The search would have to take any writing as just mere writing and any alleged God as just, whatever. But what I'm saying is that I think a search could be done and something could be found that would make sense to both sides. Now, I don't know that's a fact. But what I'm saying, let's put it this way. If evidence is ever presented, it probably won't be an atheist who found it. It'll probably be someone who continued searching, who gave up.
Strongly disagree with that.
The idea.
Yeah, I would strongly disagree with that. And the reason is because the whole purpose behind scientific endeavor, and I'm not trying to conflate science and atheism here, but like the whole purpose behind scientific thinking is prove me wrong, prove myself wrong. You never accept a hypothesis. You fail to reject one. And so, like, if you're talking about who's actually going to be doing the discoveries, there's lots of times over the history of science where we have found something that shattered our worldviews, that completely changed the way that we thought of and interacted with the natural world around us. That happens a lot. And if you study the history of especially biology, it's over and over and over and over and over again, knocking us off our pedestals and changing the way that we see the natural world, changing the way we see our place in it. If anybody's going to change their mind when presented with new evidence, it's going to be an atheist or a scientist or maybe someone who's both. If you show a religious person, if someone's a deeply devout Christian and you show them hard proof that a different God exists, I guarantee they're going to be a lot more resistant to that evidence than somebody like Jim and I who are just saying, prove it. Prove anything beyond what we understand as naturalistic. Prove any supernatural thing, even including what you said, which I think was a great point, that supernatural, if something supernatural exists, it exists in the natural world, therefore it isn't supernatural. But like if anybody's going to change their mind, science has shown throughout history that that's what we're best at. That's what we do. Yeah. We thought the world was this way, and then holy crap, we found this other thing that completely relativity, fossils, everything that took our world apart, quantum mechanics. It changed the way we saw reality, and we rolled with it. Yeah. As opposed to the people who are, and again, I know you're not just talking about Christianity, but contradict that with, or compare that to the people who are still looking at an Iron Age sex manual and saying this is where we need to draw laws from today. I don't agree with your premise that we wouldn't be the ones to accept the new evidence.
No, I'm saying you wouldn't be the ones to find it, I think, because you're not looking for it. That's what I think I'm saying.
Were we looking for fossils?
What do you think this show is?
Yeah, I mean, we're asking. Yeah. I mean, were we looking for evidence of evolution when Nicholas Steno discovered that tones are actually shark's teeth, and that led to a series over the next 200 years, all the way up to Cuvier, first publishing the idea of extinction. We weren't looking for that information. We found it. Right. Someone presented us with, oh shit, this isn't actually what we thought. So I don't know, man. We've been going for 15 minutes, and we got to move on to the next call. But I'll give you the last word. I think that we're a little bit more open-minded than you might give us credit for.
Okay. Well, my last word is thanks for taking the call. Thanks for giving me all the time. And one last thing, Matthew, I believe 15:1-4 for me is the worst quote in the Bible. You ought to look it up.
Matthew 15, 1-4?
Yeah, Jesus says that God commands that the cursing child must be put to death.
Yeah.
I think that's worse than, well, maybe not the worst, but I think that's up there, and you don't hear it very often. But anyway, thank you for taking my call.
I appreciate you talking to us. Seriously, It's been a great call, and I agree. There's a lot of those in the Bible. It's a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much, Art. I really appreciate you calling in. Have an awesome day, man.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Nice talking to you. See you.